Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel. I say welcome to everybody, and I think that we are online, so the crowds of people are logging on to join us as we speak. So, first of all, emergency evacuation procedure, please.
When the continuous alarm bell sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the named assembly point. The designated exits are signposted. Arrangements are in place for the safe evacuation of disabled people.
Thank you very much. Do we have any apologies for absence or substitutions?
Apologies from Councillor Ian Halsall.
And any declarations of interest? No, that's good, thank you. Under the urgent business agreed by the Chair, I just want to mention a number of items, 4 different items. First of all, after talking with Lucy as Vice Chair, we're proposing that we have 2 scrutiny panel meetings in January, one of which is for us as a panel to consider the elements of the budget and the budget proposals that come to us. The second panel meeting will be in our umbrella role, where we amalgamate the discussions from the other panels. And I think it's something that hasn't happened for the last couple of years, but certainly that's been a good practice from years in the past, so suggesting 2 panels in January. The second, I think it would be wrong not to mention the awarding of the HCRG contract by the ICB, by the Integrated Care Board. I think on 2 elements. First of all, the lack of consultation that took place, and I understand it's within the constitution of the ICB board that the public should be consulted. That very clearly hasn't happened, and there was no consultation with either ourselves or the Health Wellbeing Board. Secondly, I think the board is saying they didn't have time to consult. Well, they've known about this contract for 5 years. How long do they need? And as well, ICB boards in other parts of the country have managed to consult and have managed to involve the public. Why couldn't we? So, just putting that out there, because I know that that Dina, as chair of the Health and Wellbeing Scrutiny Board, I think is going to speak to the ICB board about this. So just for the minutes. I think as well, third item is Lucy will be standing down, Lucy Hodge will be standing down as vice chair of this panel. So thank you for the work you've done over the last couple of years. I think it's Malcolm will be stepping up as Vice Chair, so Councillor Malcolm Treby. Sorry, I keep forgetting, this is anyone who's watching, just using first names isn't going to quite work. And of course, it's saying goodbye to Andy Rothery, who I understand it's your last panel meeting, and that moving to pastures new or close by in Bristol. I think it has been noted that you're leaving on the 20th of December, which is the day after the announcement of the government settlement. So presumably there's something that you know that we don't, but we will pick up on that later. More seriously, thank you, Andy. Good luck in pastures new in Bristol. Okay. So that's urgent business. Then moving on to public councillor statements. So Councillor Karen Walker making a statement on Peasdown, St John and the budget process.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, panel members. This statement is on behalf of myself and Councillor Gavin Heathcote for the ward of Peasdown, St John. Each year we see millions of pounds being spent on numerous projects across the local authority, all of which are carried out with the desire to invest in our communities and to improve the quality of life for our residents. We are grateful that the Council uses a budget setting and discussion process that allows all councillors to contribute and make representations on behalf of their constituents. It is for this very reason that we're submitting this statement and these items for consideration in the 25-26 Council budget. Each year we spend time out in our community knocking on doors, meeting residents and finding out what their desires and aspirations are for Peasdown St John. This is their wish list for the forthcoming council budget. 50,000 for Bath Road pavement resurfacing, 50,000 for pedestrian crossing on Orchard Way, 7,000 for Duncan Hill Ashgrove speed limit reduction, 10,000 for additional trees in Orchard Way, 50,000 to resurface Old Kills Hill, 60,000 to resurface Braesdown Lane, and that is from the junction of the A367 bypass to the Peasdown allotments. 30,000 to resurface Whitebrook Lane, and again that's from the Cricket Club to the Camerton Cattery. 100,000 to upgrade 5 bus stops, each having a new shelter, plus real-time information and screens. Please may I ask that you make these recommendations to the Cabinet coming up soon to go forward to the Council budget in 25-26. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Karen. Make sure that statement is passed on to the appropriate Cabinet member. Thank you. Moving on then to the minutes of the previous meeting. Are you happy for me to sign these as correct record? I take that as a yes. Thank you. And then agenda item 8 is the Cabinet member update. I see you've got a couple of Cabinet members here, and obviously there's particular items as well you'll be picking up. Anything under... Is anything you want to say as Cabinet members that's not coming up at the other agenda items?
I'm happy to give a quick update if you'd like to, Chair. Obviously, as you say, we've got the items coming up as part of the meeting anyway, and my main activity over the last couple of months since we last met has been largely around budget, monitoring for in-year and for planning for next year's budget. We have obviously had the national budget since we last met, and there was some welcome extra finance in that budget for local government, but I think that could be characterised as a sticking plaster to stem the bleeding rather than a strategic long-term fix. We're still waiting for the detail on what our actual financial settlement will be for next year. As you mentioned, that will come on the 19th of December, we think, just before the Christmas recess of Parliament. I'll talk about the in-year monitoring when we get to that point. The week before the budget, I actually attended the LGA annual conference along with the Council Leader, the Chief Executive, and yourself in your role as Leader of the Opposition. I think we'd all agree it was good to hear a welcome and significant change in tone from the new government compared to the previous Tory administration, but we're still pretty light on detail about how the new Labour government are going to tackle the considerable crisis in local government funding. And we're expecting that we'll get more detail as we move towards the spring statement, and we'll get some proper clarity then. I would like to take the opportunity to highlight to the panel the Household Support Fund. This is the funding that the government allocates to local councils to help support those most in need with the cost of essentials. Round 6 of that funding has now been allocated to councils. It must be spent before March 2025, and we've got just under £1 million to distribute. Our main areas of focus for this funding will be winter fuel payments to pensioners to try and cover some of the inevitable difficulties that will follow the government's decision to remove the universal winter fuel payment for pensioners. We'll be looking at contributions to food banks, free school meal vouchers for eligible children to cover the Christmas and February half-term holidays, and funding for Citizens Advice Fuel and Food Crisis Scheme. There's also the discretionary crisis fund element, which is available for residents who find themselves in particular crisis. This is obviously a really important scheme to help our most vulnerable residents through the winter period, so I thought it was worth highlighting to the committee and to the wider public. I'd also like to add my thanks to Andy Rothery, because this is my final public meeting with him, as I'm not attending council on Thursday, so I wish him well in his movements to as you say, pastures new after, I think, 14 years with Baines Council, which is a long stint. Thank you. He's helped steer us through some really very turbulent financial waters over the last few years, including COVID. So I think that's our thanks are very much due to him. I should reassure the panel that we've made an offer to an interim replacement to cover the period between Andy leaving and the permanent replacement being appointed, and that the process of recruitment for a permanent replacement is well underway and is going very well so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on that specific? Toby?
Just to comment how welcome the HSF6 money is. I've already started spending a bit of it in my role as a Citizens Advice volunteer. So it does help people. This was a single parent needing fuel help.
Malcolm?
Yeah, my question was just around household support fund as well. Great that we're jumping in to cover winter fuel payments and things where needing things there. Does us having to do that mean that there are areas which we would have previously funded which we're unable to fund this year?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a fixed pot of money, so we make decisions each time it comes up as to which areas we'll fund. The full details are available, and I can distribute them to the panel if they're interested. I'm not aware of anything that we've specifically dropped, but obviously the proportions have changed.
Thank you. Just a comment from myself about LGA conference. Like you, it was good to hear a change of tone, particularly from the Deputy Prime Minister's speech when she talked about local government is for local government and certainly signalled less interference from Whitehall in that. I think, and also the indication that at the moment clearly the new government is trying to pick up the pieces and see where things are, but indicating that looking for 3 or 4 year settlements as from next year, so there's a degree of certainty for local government hopefully coming into the future. Thank you for that. And then moving on to the next agenda item, which is the Council's operating model being our best. Bob, update from Dave Woods.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'll be talking briefly about the Bob being our best programme and the Council's operating model, and handing over to Cherry to take us through some slides. So the Council launched the Being Our Best programme just over a year ago. This is an ambitious change programme with 3 interconnected work streams, which are great jobs, smarter structures and the culture of excellence. We're doing this work for a number of reasons. Amongst those are to be able to live our values and behaviours and to support our staff to do their best to improve people's lives, to check and reassure our organisation that equity and fairness is at the heart of how we operate, to modernise and upgrade our pay and grading system, to benchmark more effectively with the market and with local pay data, and to improve staff recruitment and retention through clearer role profiles and more clearly defined career pathways. And finally, to enable our staff to be change ready and identifying opportunities to improve our services whilst engaging with the residents. On the operating model specifically, you've got a copy of the Cabinet report that sets out how the Council is evolving its structure in response to this to enable the delivery of the corporate strategy. The officers have engaged with the Cabinet to develop a management structure and a service operating model that's aligned with the ambition of our administration. This operating model will be used to inform service changes through the implementation of the Bob programme. I'm pleased to say that this paper before you clearly explains the purpose of the Council's directorate structure and the functions that sit in each area. This Council is a large organisation and it can be quite complicated to navigate for people who work here as well as our residents. So this clarity is very helpful. That was actually approved at Cabinet last Thursday on the 14th of November. I'll introduce Cherry Bennett, our Director of People and Change, who will provide you with an officer update for information on the Being Our Best programme, including the headlines of the operating model also.
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm just going to talk you through the slides that you had in the papers. So I will run through them fairly quickly because I'm assuming you've had a chance to read them. I'll put a bit of context around the slides, and I'm obviously very happy to take any questions. So the purpose of the briefing today is to provide you with information on the Being Our Best Culture Change programme, to update you on the progress we've made to date, talk you through briefly the headlines around the Council's target operating model so you can see how it fits as part of this work, but also to recognise there are some sensitive parts of the programme and some of the context in which this information is shared. So there's some bits I can talk about more in this environment. There are bits obviously I can't share at this point in time, or I can update you in other ways outside of this meeting if that would be helpful for colleagues as well. So in late 2022, early 2023, we worked with our professional advisors, who I will kind of talk about a little bit more in a minute, a company called Corn Ferry, to help us think about the piece of work we wanted to embark on. Particularly, we kind of had a whole series of challenges that we are facing as a leadership team then, and we are still facing some of those challenges now. The whole point of this programme is to try and work through those challenges and to change how we work. And what I've put here, I've cut one of the kind of summary slides in terms of the different pain points, the drivers and aspirations that the executive leadership team identified at the time in terms of how we want the organisation to change. I won't spend a long time kind of talking you through all of this. I'm going to talk to you about what we've done about it. But really this was just so you could see the headlines of that report, and partly to provide you with some reassurance that there was a really robust piece of work undertaken, and analysis undertaken that has informed all three strands of the work that we're doing, but particularly the very technical parts in the Great Jobs workstream and the Smarter Structures workstream as well. So who are Corn Ferry? So Corn Ferry Hay Group own the intellectual property of the Hay Job Evaluation Scheme. We have a job evaluation scheme here, as many other councils do. It's well established and robust. The Hay Job Evaluation Scheme is used by lots of other local authorities, but it's also used very widely across the public sector. We've used it here for a number of years, and we didn't want to change our job evaluation scheme, but we did want to review how we were using it and check ourselves again. It had been a number of years since we'd done an organisational-wide review of all our job roles and role profiles and job descriptions. So we originally commissioned them to do a very short piece of work analysis for us in October 22, and that turned into this longer piece, kind of partly development of the programme, but also a longer piece of analysis thinking about how we are structured, our ways of working that have kind of led into the operating model. We also commissioned them to help us move from our current or our previous system of job descriptions, thinking about role profiles. Just to be really clear, their role with us is one of expert advice or giving expert advice. They've helped us with some of the drafting and quality assurance work and also pay modelling. We don't have the skills, experience to do that within the HR and OD team here at the council. We're quite a small team, and this really is a kind of an expert role, and one that we want to get right, and you need that kind of robust methodology sitting underneath the work that you're doing. It's also one of capacity for us as well, so supporting us with both those pieces. So as Councillor Wood mentioned, there are three streams to the programme. We've used this slide. We use this slide in pretty much every briefing that we do for colleagues across the council, and it's really to show that there are three work streams that are interconnected. We're not working on kind of just pay and reward, or just our structures, or just our culture and kind of what it feels like to work here and what the experiences are for our staff. We recognised very early on that we wanted to work across all three streams. We need to pull lots of different levers here and change in different ways. So these are the aims of each of our programmes, and again I'll take you through where we've got to with each of those work streams. So each work stream has an executive director lead. We have a programme board, so I haven't kind of put in much around the governance here, but again to reassure you that we have a programme board that comprises of the executive leadership team. It's chaired by Will Godfrey, our chief executive. I have the role of senior responsible officer, so SRO for the programme, and I manage a small programme team within the HR and OD service, but there are colleagues from finance, equalities and other places that we kind of pull in as and when we need specialist advice on certain parts of the programme. And each executive director has taken a lead role across each work stream so that we have that executive director sponsorship and ownership of the programme. So Mandy Bishop is our lead on the Great Jobs programme. And what I've put here was just a slice from that Corn Ferry report that tried to kind of summarise the challenge that we are looking at and working to overcome. So with the Great Jobs piece, we established, I think, that our pay and reward here, our pay and reward systems, our structure, our pay management, don't always enable the attraction and retention of talent. So our system for rewarding and attracting the right talent needs overhauling, so thinking about career pathways within that, thinking about our grading structures. We have an over-reliance on market supplements, which kind of means we're not getting it right. Some of that was kind of in the post-Brexit and post-COVID world that we found ourselves in. The labour market has changed significantly in the last few years, and we haven't necessarily moved with the times. These big pieces of work are huge and take up lots of organisational energy and capacity, so you have to pick the right time to do it. And I think had it not been for COVID, we probably would have done this work in around 2020, and kind of COVID got in the way of us getting started with some of this. Ensuring that we are paying equal pay for work of equal value is also a concern. That's not to say we have lots of cases. In fact, we have no cases of equal pay here. No equal pay claims have been made in the 7 years that I have worked here. But you'll have seen in the press, other councils are facing significant financial pressure due to historic equal pay claims. And we haven't looked at this work for a number of years here, so now is the time to reassure ourselves. And you only do that kind of looking across the organisation as a whole. I'll touch on that more in a second. So what we've done is move from having around 1,000 job descriptions. These are usually quite hefty, lengthy descriptions of roles. Some of them are absolutely tailored to an individual and a single person in a single role. And what we wanted to do was streamline that, be much, much clearer in our roles and have a much clearer kind of view of the organisational picture of where our job roles were landing. Again, I'll touch on that with you in a second. So what we've done is take those 1,000 job descriptions and condense that down to, we've landed at about 350. You'll see the number is slightly different in different places. That's just because we have some duplication, whether it's an operational or back office version of that role. But we have around 350 role profiles now covering 2,400 staff. So that's also including our colleagues that transferred in through adult social care in April of this year as well. We've agreed a series of job categories and of what we're calling work zone levels, which basically mean that we can describe our workforce in more generic terms, but in more coherent and consistent terms, so that we can group together roles depending on the types of role they are or the level of work at which they are operating as well, through our front line, through our managers and experts, through to senior management and the executive leadership team. We sent staff a letter in July this year telling everyone what their role profile match was. That letter was for information because we needed to then begin a process of consultation and collective bargaining with trade unions in the first instance, and we're now about to widen that process of consultation up to staff. So a huge amount of work has gone on to create the role profiles in the first place, to map all staff to those role profiles, and then to think about a new pay and grading structure for the council as well. So one of the ways in which we can use those role profiles, and this isn't, I mean, it's based on reality, but this isn't the final position we've landed in. This is kind of a bit of a picture for explanation to bring it to life. But what we've been able to do there is look at the enabling job category, for example. So that's the line across the top. These are a number of different role profile, kind of what we call clusters. So procurement, there's a number of roles that sit in our procurement role profile cluster. And it shows you where they are in relation to other roles across the council. So business partnering roles, project manager roles, service designers, for example. And where then they then sit across our levels of work and across our grading structure. The reference levels are not a grading structure, that's a job evaluation term that we use, but they do map broadly across. And it's really thinking about how we can use these role profiles to have a much clearer picture for individuals, if it's right for them, thinking about their career at the council. So you might be a procurement officer 1, for example, But that doesn't necessarily mean that your next job is procurement officer 2, 3 or 4. You might want to look sideways and think about maybe a business analyst role, a project manager role, and so people can kind of see the family, the job category within which they sit, the other roles within that job category, and the different types of opportunity that might be available to them. So moving away from kind of silo and service kind of thinking. And just at the bottom here again, this is some of the material that we've been using with managers and leaders across the council to have some of the conversations about using this to think about people's careers. Where am I today? Where can I go? How can I get there? So what do I need to be a procurement officer 3 or a project manager 5? What does that, 4, sorry, I've overextended there. What does that mean in terms of my future, the skills and experience I need to gain? And how do I get there? And then that conversation about help me get there. So thinking about our management development programs, thinking about our coaching conversations, career development, what skills, what tools, what technology do I need to know to enable me to be ready for those roles if that's right for me. So just thinking about careers here at the council in a much more joined up way. So that's one of the ways in which we use these role profiles. It's not just about describing work, getting a job evaluation score and a pay and grading line. It's a much, much broader conversation for us. The second way we can have a much broader conversation is to start looking at this data now across the council as a whole. So this is data we've never had before because we had nearly 1,000 job descriptions. Some applied to 10, one job description applied to 10 people in some areas, and it was a one-for-one match in other areas. It was just impossible to kind of map coherently where everybody landed. So across the top of this table, customer services enabling, health, wellbeing and care, leadership, operations and place shaping and delivery are the 6 job categories, 6 job families that we have landed on. And then there are 6 zones, these work levels going down the side. So that describes the different groups of roles, both across the organisation and then thinking about them in increasing levels of skill, experience, responsibility as you go up the organisation. So again, this is just one example of the data we are starting to gather now as these role profiles are finalised, so we can start to see where the heat map, where lots of people are sitting in the organisation. We have heat maps by profile as well. We can break them down by executive directorate, by job category, by service, so you can start to see where people are landing. I think one of the things that's become quite apparent, and this is one of the links now for us with the Smarter Structures work, we're quite a top-heavy organisation. You can see that from the heat map here. We don't have as many roles as we once used to at the bottom, towards the lower end of the pay scale, thinking about apprentice roles and more junior trainee roles. We know that's an issue kind of nationally, but it's echoed here within the council. And we knew that before, but we now have it in much starker, clearer terms that we can start to really think about that on a service and directorate and cross-council basis. So these are just some of the tools and some of the ways in which we're using this work. I've added this slide in here just to really kind of emphasise the point that it is only one driver, but it's a very strong and important statutory legal consideration that we must have and must take on board as an employer. We must ensure equity across our workforce. That does include our schools support staff as well. So support staff in our maintained schools, we are still the employer of those staff too, so we must be able to look across both the council and our slightly wider workforce in our maintained schools as well. So using job evaluation to get the job sizing right is one part of looking at how we ensure equity and equal pay for work of equal value. Thinking about our pay policy, so a lot of the work we're doing around the pay and grading structure, the number of incremental increases, for example, how many grades we have, how those grades are defined, are all part of thinking about our pay policy. And then we're also looking at pay management, so things like the number of market supplements we pay, who we pay them to, men, women, under the different protected characteristics, kind of looking at that data with lots of different lenses to make sure that we are being fair and equitable, but that we have robust and objective policy and procedure and job evaluation that sits beneath that. So the last point I just wanted to make on this was really to talk through the key principles we have agreed. Some of these we've had at the council for a long time. They're not new, but we've never articulated them really clearly and in this way. So some of the work we've done, we're still using job evaluation to identify our grade boundaries and those logical kind of work zones. but we are looking much more closely at the market and market data to benchmark our pay. We're still part of national pay bargaining here, so we still use the national spine points, but where we draw those grade lines and what we do, particularly at the top end, where we move away from national points because there aren't any, looking at how we set those pay levels to keep up with the market, to make sure that we are paying our staff fairly across the council, but also competitively within the marketplace as well. Equity is obviously one of our principles that underpins what we do, but also making it clear that elements of different types of pay and reward and career development opportunities are not just for those at the top of the organisation or in the middle of the organisation, that all those opportunities are available to all, should they wish, and we obviously are very kind of clear that it has to be personal choice as part of that too. And then thinking about our pay range and how individuals progress. So some of the proposals that we're bringing forward that we're talking to the trade unions about are including more elements of performance-related incremental progression. So we have contractual provision for that here already, but it's not something we've ever used before and done before here. And we now want to be able to do that so that we can, again, bring that much clearer link between performance and pay and outcomes for our residents and outputs for the council. So moving on to the next work stream, the second one, our work stream there is our Smarter Structures stream. Our Executive Director lead for that work stream is Andy for the next at least month. So Andy Rothery is the lead for that work stream. One of the things that Corn Ferry identified for us were that our structural layers, and particularly our management layers, need to be clarified and their purpose and contribution articulated to the whole organisation. You'll have seen in the earlier piece as well, Corn Ferry did quite a robust piece of analysis for us on the amount of roles, sort of using job evaluation effectively where we've got duplication potentially in roles, where our structures are quite top-heavy, and where we could be spending our time and effort in terms of thinking about working in more efficient and more effective ways. So we had that report from Corn Ferry in October 2023, so it was a very detailed analysis of literally going through every single structure across each service in the council, and those were shared with each executive director. We've agreed a new set, or a kind of revised set, of organisational design principles underpinning this work, so that we're much clearer with our heads of services. They're working up their structures in terms of what we expect in terms of layers of management, spans of control, kind of team size, sets of responsibilities across those role profiles. So we've done that work as well. We've always had some, they just weren't very clear and they weren't very well communicated, so we've done a lot more work on that. We've identified, you'll remember in the budget last year, there were 2 lots of savings identified across 24, 25 and 25, 26 coming out of this Smarter Structures work, 2.5 million in 24, 25 and 2 million in 25, 26. So as part of that, a director restructure was undertaken and completed in January 2024, and a head of service restructure completed in June 2024. So that's structural work where we're kind of looking across the organisation. And then once we completed the head of service work, we are now looking kind of through each head of service and looking at service redesign. It's much harder to look across the organisation once you get to that level in services. So we need to then look down through the organisation that way. So each exec director is responsible for a set of a phased plan for Smarter Structures design work. We are mostly still in the design phase for those service redesign pieces at the moment. They're at different stages. We've got some that are ready to start consulting with staff in the next few months, and others that will take a little bit longer. So as Councillor Wood touched on, one of the outcomes of the Smarter Structures work has been to work through and to, again, some of this has been in place for a long time, but we've never articulated it very clearly or clearly enough. And one of the pieces of work that Andy has led on is to define our council operating model and its principles and its function and how it works. So, as Councillor Wood said, you have the full paper on this, and I've just pulled out some of those headlines to just take you through now. So each directorate is responsible for the functions set out in the operating model, how they're designed, managed, structured and delivered across the council. The Resources Directorate will enable the Council to deliver its purpose through sound policy, strategy and governance, and enable services to effectively manage our people, finances and information. Sustainable communities leads on place shaping, working with communities and stakeholders to develop and deliver plans to achieve the Council's objectives. And operations will directly deliver or commission most of the Council's frontline services, protecting our most vulnerable, keeping communities safe, in good health for as long as possible, and maintain and promote our neighbourhoods in unique environment. So this is a picture, if you like, of that same model and kind of describing the sets of services that sit underneath each of those directorates, its relationship with the executive leadership team and the cabinet, and then what that means in terms of those, the three parts of our corporate strategy there sitting on the right-hand side. This one's a bit more listy, but these are the functions. This is kind of the functional version of that operating model. So these are each of the functions that sit under sustainable communities, operational services, and resources. Again, I'm not going to talk you through it. You've had a chance to read that paper and look at it. But just to put that in kind of in its context, and as we're thinking about our smarter structures work, we link it back to what's the kind of form and purpose and function of those services within that directorate. How do they help us meet our objectives under the corporate strategy, and how can we organise ourselves in a way that's coherent using kind of our job evaluation and our design principles, but also in terms of meeting the objectives we need to meet. The final work stream to share with you is the culture of excellence. We have 3 work streams, 3 executive directors. So Sophie Broadfield is our executive director lead for this work stream. And again, here is a summary from that first piece of Corn Ferry work. We talked about the intended culture not being activated. Our target culture of the organisation is not always reflected in ways of working, and our values need to be activated. There's a cultural tendency to avoid difficult conversations and giving constructive feedback, which results in a lack of accountability and creation of additional processes or activity. So to a degree, that's Corn Ferry playing back to us kind of some of our concerns. This work stream is a little bit behind the other 2 for obvious reasons. We need to do some of the what we call hardwiring, some of the kind of technical work first, so then we can think about the culture work. But we are running them all in parallel because we recognise there's lots to do. So we've embarked upon a leadership reset, particularly now we've done the director and completed the director and head of service restructure. So that work, we're kind of two development sessions in with our heads of service and thinking about new ways of working for our heads of service cohort. Our organisational development team have just launched, or we're just launching, a new management development programme linked to those levels of work that I showed you that we've now designed and kind of codified for all kind of first-line supervisors, team leaders, managers, senior managers across the organisation, and those aspiring to any of those roles. So that programme is launching now this month, and we're just starting with one cohort this month, and then we'll have another one start in the new year. We expect to put through our kind of cohort of around 300 managers through that programme in the next kind of 18 months to 24. So we've got quite a lot of work to do to cover that as well. We're doing further work to embed our values and behaviours. We are planning a staff conference in the spring next year. We're doing lots of work around staff engagement, firstly on the change programme in and of itself, but also holding focus groups. We're talking about our next staff survey next year and what that looks like as well. So there's kind of different streams to this piece of work that underpins everything else that we're trying to achieve. So then just finally, how are we changing? So this is a slide that we've used in conversations with our trade unions and with our staff. And this is what we've said to staff, that as a result of this programme, you can expect a supportive workplace where we can all thrive and be empowered and trusted to make decisions. We'll have a clear purpose, clear expectations, and the opportunity to progress in the organisation should we wish to do so. Improving the way we work collectively, maximising our efficiency by simplifying our processes and increasing our internal capacity, clarifying what our pay and reward offer is, modernising that and having clear and fair career pathways for new and existing staff, and ensuring that our culture aligns to our best values, allowing us to have challenging conversations in a safe environment and always being ready for the future.
Thank you for that run through. Do we have any questions, please? Toby, then Malcolm, then Toby.
Cool, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Really interesting. I note this has gone through to Cabinet for approval and things already, and I just question that timing around that then? This is a corporate operating model, and I'd observe, I think, that the scrutiny and development of that, I would have thought, fell firmly into the remit of this committee. I would question why it hadn't come here first of all for that scrutiny and development. And so, accepting that sort of happened, I'd ask really how this committee could be involved next in terms of scrutinising how this model is embedded within the council and how it's accepted, whether that and the sort of impact that has on culture and how that's going to be measured.
I don't think I'm able to answer your first question coherently. I'm not sure entirely kind of what conversations have happened where around what went to Cabinet and what came here when. I think one thing I'd certainly say is with the being our best programme as a whole, it's been going on for quite some time, and I think we've made lots of progress, but at times it's felt quite slow and we haven't had very much to share, and then we've kind of made lots of, and we've kind of gone too far. I don't know if that's very helpful, but it's been kind of a bit lumpy, I think, not very coherent.
I guess my comment on that first bit is probably not one really directed to you particularly, as well more than this came to Cabinet for approval, I think it was last week, and why that wasn't steered then to say actually this is something which we're probably happy to approve, but we probably want to scrutinise a bit first of all, and here's the place to go and send it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair challenge. We can feed that back.
And just to answer your second part, so how can the committee be more involved? I would welcome, I think, any conversations with you. I will give that a bit of thought, I think, and maybe put a proposal to the chair and think about how we can do that. I think we are consulting at the moment with our trade unions and with our staff in terms of the proposals, but we've only done this part of the work. There's still lots more to do, and again, we'd welcome, I think, bringing certain parts back at the right time is important, has been important to the programme, and I think we've put out quite a lot of comms just literally today to staff, so we're in a slightly different position even than when I wrote the slides a week ago or 2 weeks ago. So I think I'll talk to Councillor Moss and we'll work out a way to bring it back. I can bring back regular updates if that would be helpful, or particular parts if they're the parts that you'd like to really have a look at and a longer, deeper conversation at hand. I'd be really happy to do that.
That'd be great, and I'd just be interested to really understand how people are accepting this and how they feel it's bedding in when it comes in. I spent my morning in my day job going through culture survey responses.
Chair, do you mind if I just come in and just also respond to Councillor Treby's question about kind of the running order? I think the first thing to note is in terms of the operating model going to Cabinet, it was for Cabinet to also kind of note and support, because what the operating model is doing, it's a kind of visual articulation of the management structure that's in place in the council, so the officer management structure, and that went through Resources Implementation Committee, as Cherry said, some time ago. So it's more of a useful guide for planning further structure changes in the council. If there are any material changes that come from the operating model, I would expect that to go through, additional consultation, scrutiny, etc. But this is a kind of a visual representation that does two things. It kind of helps explain the executive director structure in terms of their purpose, but then also explains what functions sit under them. So it's kind of a full information piece, but its benefit is being able to explain to councillors, to residents and to officers in the council where the functions sit at the moment and who's responsible for them. Because that's, the council is a complicated organisation just to navigate that, so that's one of the benefits. But I take your point on running order, as Councillor Wood said.
I've got two areas of interest, I think, in this. First is, as a member of the Pension Committee, we had an interesting presentation about the processes that the pension fund uses. And the impression I got was that every time something slips through the net, you put another control in, and you build controls on controls, and that depowers people. So the process model that the pension team were looking at was to try to take out some of the controls and to trust people to get it right first time and not to duplicate. I think the other problem for the pension team is that there was a difficulty in recruiting because of pay levels, and so there were market supplements. I think I'd like to hear a bit more about how you're going to eliminate them and that probably means pay increases for those people who work in are less popular markets, but have we got a cost, have we got a programme for dealing with market supplements and making sure that that's equal opportunity, equal pay approved? I'll come back to my other point in a moment.
So I can definitely update you in terms of what so we've put a set of proposals specifically for pay for staff in the Avon Pension Fund. They are our employees, but we recognise they are slightly separate. It's a different form and function for the council. So there's a set of proposals specifically around what we might do for the pay for staff in the Avon Pension Fund that Nick Dixon, the head of pensions, has been leading on. Those proposals are out for consultation with unions and staff. So hopefully you can be reassured that we have heard that part and are listening to it. Part of the work that we've been doing around market supplements for the council as a whole, again, is in that pay management piece. We pay, and we've been paying an increasing number of market supplements in recent years. So some of the work we've done to look at our pay and grading structure was to, again, anchor that pay within the market. So we've done more benchmarking work than we've ever done before to try and look at those grades. Again, I didn't put the numbers in to show you because they weren't in the public domain. I can certainly absolutely talk you through those numbers if you'd like to. They've gone out today. And we are talking about, we're consulting the trade unions on reworking our market supplement policy and the processes that sit around that. Where possible, I don't want to use market supplements. We should be paying the right salary at the right level first time. I think we have to recognise, though, in a council the size we've got different industry pressures taking place. You know, what happens in waste and recycling and with our drivers and what's happening in the financial services industry for pensions are quite different things. So we have to get that balance right and still ensure equity and fairness absolutely across the board and in the heart of what we do. So it's a balance. I hope when the pay and reward policy comes to full council as part of the budget work, you'll see that we've made some, I hope, as long as we get there with the trade unions, but we've made some quite significant steps to improve that and improve our thinking on that.
Thank you. Yes, and if it's coming as part of the budget work, then perhaps as part of our budget scrutiny in the first of our meetings in January, we could look at a paper about that. And if you've just circulated something, it would be interesting to have it by way of background. Moving on, the other area that I've had difficulty with the council is looking at highways and place shaping. It seems to me that there are different teams working in different programs, and I sometimes feel they're not as closely integrated as they should be. The people dealing with improving walking and cycling seem to be different from those who are delivering city region, who are different from Mandy's people who are actually putting the construction on the ground. So I'd just like a little bit more about how we're going to de-silo work in this important area.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Sophie Broadfield and myself do work very closely, and as you said, the operationals element certainly sits on the highways operations on the ground and delivering. You'll see from your budget papers actually they're delivering very well when you look at the capital programme, which is the biggest capital programme we've delivered in highways for many years, and that is due to be delivered. Just to assure you, we have got one group that meets very regularly, and they do liaise very, very closely through from the design concept, which often on transport schemes sits, as you said, sits in sustainable communities, and they do work jointly on those programmes of work as they go through into delivery and ensure that we can programme in a timely way and know in advance. There's always room for improvement. It is a new model, and I do accept that there are on occasions, I think there's a communication message for us to do about the clarity around that division of what sits within that place shaping and when it comes over into operational delivery. And I've heard that a few times, so I think that's a very constructive challenge back, and I think that's something we need to think about how we explain that better moving forward.
Also working with WECA, and granted the work has just lost its infrastructure director. That's another challenge.
Yeah, so that's very much led through the Sustainable Communities Place Shaping Agenda. Sophie Broadfield is the lead exec director, and the grant funding that comes in very much comes through that team and is coordinated through that team.
Thank you, Chair. Cherry, thank you so much for what is a huge piece of work that you guys have been doing. It's my second time of hearing it run through, and I think the Chair also sat in on that previous meeting. And I think I would like to echo Malcolm's point. I think scrutiny is about not a show and go. We talked previously about figures and cost of implementation, time frames and things. And I thought that's what a scrutiny panel is about. So it is important that we start revisiting this, I think, and going forward. But I would just like to commend everybody for what is a huge piece of work. We are a fair employer, and that's through our track record, but setting ourselves for the future is important. And when the Office of National Statistics told me there are 70,000 job functions in the UK, to get it down to 340 odd is pretty good. Well done.
Thank you. Lucy?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a really extensive piece of work and it's still ongoing. But just to say, the questions I had about performance, progression being related to performance, and how are you planning to assess performance, and is there going to be a change in the way that that's done? And also just thinking about the savings that were not so much targets, are they, that they were anticipated to be achieved? Are you expecting that level of savings still to be achieved, and have the costs of this big transformation been as expected or different from what you were expecting?
So to answer your first question about performance, the proposals that we have just shared with staff this afternoon, are not quite the same ones we shared with the trade unions a few months ago. So other colleagues are aware of kind of the full set. They're not quite what they were, but that's what collective bargaining, that's what negotiation is about. So they're not. Yeah. So the piece that we have shared with staff is that we are proposing that from the 1st of April to 2026, so giving ourselves 18 months. Incremental progression, so progression up through our pay grades, will be linked to performance. We already have contractual provision for that, but we've never applied it. Other councils are in the same or similar position. So what and I think to change that, we need to kind of work through that with staff and make sure we have the right and robust kind of processes in place. So we've given ourselves 18 months to ensure that we have a system here called Clear Review that we use as software to record objectives and feedback and progress. That it's been rolled out really successfully across service areas in the council, but it's much harder to use that software in our frontline services who don't have laptops, computers, easy access to digital means. So we've got quite a bit of work still to make sure it's working in our operational services, particularly across care and across waste and recycling. We have put proposals forward now, and we hope that they will be agreed. We have other proposals to link pay with performance that we have said to the unions we won't discuss at this point with staff, but we have absolutely put it on the table to come back and have a further conversation. That's more about, so incremental progression will simply be, have you met your objectives? The contractual term actually says satisfactory service, so that's meeting objectives. We also want an element of exceptional performance and being able to recognise and reward exceptional performance. That's the bit that we will come back to in terms of our conversations with the unions. Your second question, so savings, again, I think you'll see progress against savings in your budget report, so the savings against the Being Our Best programme are a separate budget line. We have found just over 500,000 through the Director and Head of Service restructure. There is some further savings that will be found this year. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but certainly a few 100,000 have been identified, hopefully to be delivered by the end of this financial year, but it's not the £2.5 million that we've anticipated, that we put into the budget. But the plans are in place, as I say, with the exec directors. It's a discussion we have monthly at our programme board, our progress against kind of timescales and making sure that that 4 million will be achieved over the 2 years and by the end of next year. So there is robust governance in place. Some of this, there's timing about all of this, and I think we may have been a little bit ambitious in our timescales in terms of what we'd phased in what year and what was in this year and next year. But we do expect to achieve the 4 million by the end of next year.
Duncan.
Thank you for your presentation. Very helpful. What I want to talk about is appraisal. It may be that as an organisation you're some way away yet from having processed in terms of appraisal. But appraisal is not easy. You've got to have the right environment, you've got to have the right information being fed in, you might want self-appraisal, peer appraisal. You need a manager that's experienced in actually conducting appraisals to make it valuable, and the whole thing can break down if those conversations aren't properly managed. So people will need training and monitoring, and appraisal will need to be centre stage. So how do you think as an organisation that you're going to develop your appraisal processes?
Oh, sorry, I've realised I left it on. Absolutely, that's one of the things I could come and talk to you more about, if that would be a good kind of conversation in terms of managing performance and appraisals. I could definitely have a much longer conversation now. So I think we have had good appraisal systems here before. We call it a performance development conversation. I've been to Scrutiny certainly in the past to talk about how we've done that. I think our issue was always the recording of those conversations was patchy. And having our new system of clear review now, which we've had for a couple of years, I think, is much more helpful. We've moved away, I think, from an annual appraisal. We've asked our managers to make it a continuous conversation and have a career conversation or a slightly bigger conversation on a 6-monthly or annual, whatever kind of works for the person and their job role basis. But we do know it's not consistent across the council, partly for reasons that I've mentioned. Our training of managers here hasn't been mandatory, and we haven't had, again, a way of recording and ensuring that that training has been delivered and is consistent. So it's one of the reasons, again, we're talking about bringing in incremental progression based on performance, not this April, but April 26, to give ourselves time. So in terms of the agreement we've been working, or the proposal's been working up with the trade union, giving ourselves time to ensure that managers are trained in setting smart objectives, in giving good feedback, in using the system itself, but the system is kind of only one small part of it, and having good and meaningful conversations is all part of, and again, fits under that culture of excellence work. It's all part of what we need to do. So yes, absolutely, and I'll be really happy to talk about it more.
Thank you very much for that. Looking at the time, I think that's been a very full discussion of a very important issue. I'm aware as well that this is a major piece of work that is still in progress. So I look forward to seeing you come back again, presumably towards the end or at the end of the consultation process to see where we are. Okay? And yes, and thank you very much for that run through, that snapshot in time. Thank you. Moving on then to the Council Tax Reduction Scheme update. Mark.
Apologies, I've lost my notes, but I'm just going to basically hand over to Damien. He's going to give you an update based on how that scheme has progressed. You'll be aware that we introduced that last year. We introduced changes to the structure of that scheme last year, and we've now got some data to show what those changes have meant and how those have affected the most vulnerable people in our society who are entitled to the council tax reduction scheme.
Chair, we're just sorting out the tech to get some slides on the screen.
you. Hello everyone, I'm here just to give you a very quick update about the changes that we made to the local council tax support scheme from April of this year. I've got a brief analysis of some of the cases that we've looked at to see what the impacts would be on households who were worse off as a result of the changes that we made, and a couple of case studies that I'd like to talk through with you as well. So just to remind you, the key changes that we introduced were a disregard of the housing cost element in universal credit. We amended the income band ranges and discount amounts for each category, and we introduced full support for households in the lowest income range. And so we looked at a number of households who were due to be forecast to be worse off under the changes that we made. We estimated that there would be 1,154 households who would be worse off under the new rules, whereas just under 3,000 would be better or no worse off. So we conducted some field testing and looked at the council tax accounts with households who were set to lose out, and we found that 73% of them that we checked were up to date with their council tax, but there were around about 9% who had been unable to pay all their council tax and had reached summons stage by the midpoint in the financial year. This has also had an impact on discretionary awards which have been made through the welfare support team for help with council tax. We made roughly just under double the amounts of discretionary awards in terms of cost this year, whereas the number of awards that we've actually made has actually decreased. And it just sort of emphasises the additional requirement, I suppose, in terms of this discretionary help. So I've just got together a couple of case studies just to talk through. These are based on real-life council tax support claims for our residents. This particular lady, she was receiving income-related employment support allowance, and under the old rules, this would have entitled her to have all of her council tax paid. But with the changes that we introduced, she's now entitled to just 40% of her council tax to be paid, because her income falls between around about £390 to £490 per week. So even having deducted some of these benefits, like the PIP that she receives and the housing cost element, she still has a relatively high income, hence she still needs to pay 60% of her council tax. This particular lady was advised to contact the welfare support team for some discretionary help, but she's decided not to do so. But she is up to date with her council tax. And we've realised with the progression of universal credit managed migration that we're going to see a lot more cases like this where people have previously qualified under the sort of vulnerable category in the past. They'll probably be more likely to have to pay some council tax in the future. Next case study that we have prepared for you is a single parent of 2 children. This gentleman used to qualify for a 50% reduction in his council tax, but he doesn't qualify for any more help anymore. When this chap received his annual bill this year, he telephoned the benefit team and asked why he'd been sent a bill, and we talked through the changes with him. And he didn't make an application for discretionary support, but he is up to date with his council tax as well. So in terms of cost of the scheme, what we estimated is that the changes that we would introduce would add around about £250,000 to the cost of the scheme. This was budgeted in, if you look at the green line on these graphs, this graph I'm showing you, the actual cost of the scheme, although it fluctuates, at its highest point was around 10.77 million. So what we estimated about the changes that we would introduce and the impact on the overall cost of the scheme was relatively accurate. But as you can see, the trend, and it's not just locally, nationally, for council tax support expenditure is going downwards, and this Partly it's to do with the fact that when we set the rules of the scheme, it's with effect from the 1st of April, and sort of household incomes tend to increase slightly over the course of the year, and that's a result. The result is that during the year you can see claims tending to drop off, and people are becoming less entitled to less support. So the next steps that we are going to embark on, and it's more of an administrative change than anything. We're currently conducting an online consultation on making changes to kind of peg the income band amounts to the standard allowance of universal credit, so that we don't have to effectively increase them every year, or they will be increased, but we don't have to go through the process of consultation every year in order to increase them. But we do think that the changes that we've made have been broadly successful. Haven't had too many complaints as such, but that might be because some of the negative effects on households have been partially mitigated through additional support through the household support scheme, for example, which is going to continue next year, I think Mark mentioned earlier. Has anyone got any questions?
Toby?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I welcome the fact that you accurately estimated what the effects would be. You understood who the losers would be and took action to invite them to apply for discretionary support. So I think it's been a well-managed job. I haven't, I should have done, but I haven't looked at the online consultation about the changes. But effectively, the main change is to link the 100% rate to the standard allowance. Is that right? Are we looking at any other changes, and how are we dealing with the higher rates?
We the higher rates they will carry on in increments of £100. So the lowest amount should be pegged to the standard allowance of universal credit, and so if that's the only income of a particular household, then they will qualify for full support. So what we plan to do is write into the rules of the scheme that a kind of general rule that the lowest amount will be pegged at the relevant amount of universal credit, and that should effectively, the council will have to decide to change that rule if it doesn't want to do that in future, and it kind of safeguards in future years that there will be this sort of 100% rate for the poorest households.
As I understand it, tax credits are being phased out from the end of this year, and the government has decided to accelerate managed migration from income-related ESA. So it does seem to me that there will need to be some monitoring of the effects, because people will be moving from one of our other schemes onto the universal credit scheme, and the vast majority of working age people will in fact be on the universal credit scheme within about 2 or 3 years, won't they? So I think monitoring that and making sure we've got enough money in the discretionary fund will be important, because I think that the UC scheme is slightly less generous than the other two, aren't they?
I'd say that, broadly speaking, that's probably correct. Most people who receive income-related ESA are going to have to start paying something once they move on to universal credit. I think the extension of the household support fund will definitely help next year, and we'll probably start to see the impacts of managed migration on ESA claims by the end of this financial year, and it's at that point that I'll be extremely interested to know I think we might be able to see a sort of drop-off in the amount that the scheme's currently costing the council by that point, and we'll know whether we might need to take more we need to be a little bit more assertive in promoting the discretionary help that we can give to people next year at that point.
I think it'd be helpful if we can also have some information on arrears and collections towards the end of this year, and on the impact of tax credit phase down.
I can circulate that to Mark, and he could maybe give you a quick update. So.
Thank you. Malcolm, did you?
Yeah, mine was one around the discretionary awards. It sounds like from the case studies and things you outlined there that you had people who you thought were going to be entitled to discretionary awards, and yet they weren't applying for them. I wondered really how often does that happen? What sort of percentage of people do we think would get discretionary awards compared to those which are actually getting them? And how do we go and encourage that take up further?
It's always difficult because approaching the welfare support team is quite a different experience for households than if they were to maybe make a claim for council tax support online, or it goes through automatically associated with their universal credit claim. One thing we have done is our staff in the council tax section are fully aware of this discretionary help that people can get now, and it's at the point that people telephone and say they've received a reminder notice or a summons that they're signposted to welfare support at that point. But it is, because it's discretionary help, it's very difficult to, you have to kind of have quite a frank conversation with customers and go through their income and expenditure as well. Some people simply don't want to do it. But I think it's always going to be a very careful balance that you have to strike to kind of make sure that you're targeting the limited amount of support that you have for people who genuinely need it.
Thank you. You've had a few bites of this, Toby, so one brief one.
Just a comment that I hope you're signposting them to support agencies as well, because it's a mildly daunting form to fill in.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If they quite often people who have problem debt with council tax have other debts as well, and of course we signpost to citizens' advice for where it's appropriate, because if the sort of, whereas we can help with council tax to a degree, it's not necessarily, it's only going to be, you know, part of the nightmare that some households have. But I think it definitely has been publicised more widely now, this discretionary support, and I think we're in a better position than we were last year with it.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, just to kind of close off the discussion. Firstly, I'd like to thank Damien and the team for the work on this. I think fundamentally it is working in the way that we intended it to work, and that the people who require the most support, our most vulnerable residents, are now getting more support. And so I think I'd like to commend the work the officers did and the input that this committee had to it in the first place, because I think that the changes are having the effects that we wanted them to have, which is to focus the support right down at the people who really, really most need it.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the report. It's good to see that the modelling that you did on this has come about in practice. But I would just echo, I think, the point that's been made about the importance of understanding why people, when offered discretionary support, why they're not picking up on that, whether that's actually it's fine, or whether that is about the process of actually applying, is it acting as a barrier. And I think probably when we come back, and if any future updates, it would be useful to reflect on that. But thank you for the report. And moving on to agenda item 11, which is the revenue and capital budget monitoring. Less cheerful modelling.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, yeah. So when I reported to the last panel, we were predicting a 3.95 million overspend by the end of the year, and I said at the time that I was going to work alongside Andy Rothery, scheduling regular meetings with departments that were predicting overspends so that we could better understand the pressures that were causing the overspends and work with those departments on mitigation to bring the spending back in line. As you can see from the report, despite these efforts, the projected overspend is now sitting before mitigations at about 5.54 million. We do have some emerging management actions to bring that back down, and after taking those into account, we're looking at a more manageable 1.42 million overspend. And in line with the ongoing narrative of the last few years, the vast majority of the overspend is due to massive pressures in children's services and home to school transport, where they're currently predicting a 5.51 million overspend. There are pressures in other areas as well, but the pressures in those areas are smaller, much smaller in comparison, and I'm confident we have a path to bringing them back in line, whereas the issues with children's services, as we've always said, are more deep-rooted. I note it was highlighted in Parliament yesterday. There are some wide systemic problems with children's services which are going to need systemic change to help sort out. I'm glad to see government raising that in Parliament yesterday. I think that's a really, really important thing. I also talked about us working more effectively with our NHS colleagues. I'm hoping that we can get some traction on that a little more quickly, although with NHS budgets as stretched as they are, that will obviously be difficult as well. Those discussions won't be easy. But the emerging pressures are obviously very significant and are going to feed through into the budget conversation for next year. We are going to have to see a significant rebasing again of children's services budget, I think, for next year, because the mitigations are not going to be quick things to sort out in that area. There does continue to be upside. I mean, we've had a very strong start to the year on parking income, higher interest rates on investments, lower than expected debt charges, so the contribution from resources is better than we were predicting. But the overall picture does still remain very difficult. It was interesting again going around the LGA conference. I don't want to be too gloomy because we're evidently talking to other councils in a much better position than many councils are. We are pretty robust, and we can cope with these changes and these pressures, but it is a very difficult situation in children's services. I think, Gary, have you got anything you want to add?
Not too much. I think you've covered most of it. I think it is important to focus on the management mitigation plans, as Mark said, so they were developed to actually put us in a better position by the end of year, looking at the forecast at the end of Q2. So we have mitigated the pressure down to 1.4 million. There's still some work to be done on that, and the exec directors are constantly reviewing ways of bringing that back into balance by the end of the year. So that's all I have at this point.
Lucy, I think, was first with a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark, and thank you. And the comments I wanted to talk about homeschool transport, and I recognise that the situation isn't dramatically different in the outcome position from a few previous years, and the mitigation actions have always been kind of successful and got us back to where we need to be, and that it's a national problem, and we're not the only ones experiencing it. Having said that, we just really want to make sure we're doing as much as we can with homeschool transport, and with the rebasing, significant rebasing in children's services. And I think last year homeschool transport contributed an overspend of over 1 million. Its budget was rebased by about 1 million, I think, and here we are again. And the things I'm concerned is that at scrutiny at the budget setting last year, when we talked about this rebasing, we did say, we did ask about what was going to be put in place to try and get on the front foot up with this year, and what plans were going to be in action to address this. And so that is my question: what has taken place in the first 6 months of the year to try and stop this, to try and limit this happening again. We're also interested in any benchmarking that's been done. Where are our costs for homeschool transport compared with other local authorities? Our budget is about 9 million a year and projecting this overspend of 2 million. How does that compare with other local authorities in terms of their number of pupils that are using the service, how far they have to travel, all that sort of thing? And also the final thing is, so what have we done? What benchmarking is there? The final thing is, the trajectory. I know we've gone from thinking at Q1 that there was no overspend really, about 100,000, and now, voila, and we want to be confident that, is it a accounting delay or something, but how confident are we that that 2 million is the end point, and or where that will go in our Q3, what our Q3 prediction might be, will be an improvement. So those are my 3 questions.
Yeah, and I'll hand over to Mandy in a moment for a more detailed response, but just to say that I completely share your concerns. I think that the home to school transport area is one that, as you say, we identified last year as being a problem and is still obviously a significant problem, and evidently needs some really serious focus now, because the actions that we've taken during the year have evidently not had the desired effect. So I'll pass over to Mandy.
Thanks very much, Mark. So I thought it would be initially good to just reflect what the drivers for the cost are, and that will help you with some of your outlier position and benchmarking, Lucy. So there is no doubt, like many other local authorities, the number of education, health and care plans is significantly increased over recent years, and some of that is due to government changes in the late sort of 16, 17, 18 period. We are also seeing more children eligible for free school meals, which does make them more eligible for home-to-school transport. And just to give you an idea, in recent years, we've seen a doubling of the number of routes and our out-of-area placements. Where we are an outlier with other local authorities is our single car journeys. We definitely have got more people going out of area and more young people one-to-one in single cars or taxis. So that is an area of focus that we have been looking at. To a certain extent, like a lot of local authorities as well, we've seen a post-COVID reset of the market. So some of our routes, for example, that were costing £60 a day are now costing £240 a day as well. We also do have a front-end issue with our capacity with our SEND team, our special educational needs team, and that's certainly an area that we need to do more work in as well. So in answer to your questions, we did have a piece of work done towards the end of 2023, I should say. And going back to the question, we did have a sort of split responsibility from education and place management, and we have moved all of those functions into one team, because that was one of the recommendations. But there is a joint steering group between education and our passenger transport team that sit in place management as well. We have been out to consultation with our communities on a new home-to-school policy, which I'm pleased to say has gone through the process. There was a small element, a discretionary element in there as well, which we have consulted upon. And what that does mean in practice as well, we have a hierarchy where we try and offer people personal budgets to start with, if it's possible for them, for their families. We then do try and accommodate young people within coaches, minibuses, and those are more cost effective. How obviously, due to the acute needs of where our educational provision is, sometimes that is not an option. We cannot put young people for safety reasons in with other areas. We've strengthened our teams as well. We've got a dedicated business manager in that team now, and we have put in some software packages to try and get route optimisation as well. So those are some of the things we've done. And I think with regard to the single car journeys, what we've seen other local authorities have made some progress in is when they've actually delivered that directly. So we have started to deliver that directly, but there's much more we can do in that area, and I think that's a key area of mitigation for us as well. So those are some of the areas and the actions that we've put in place, which was very much in line with our action plan of last year. We are going back to go out to re-tender for some of our routes as well. So I think for me, the focus is on those single car journeys, and it's actually supporting our special educational needs team, because there's definitely an issue around capacity, because that delayed processing does actually delay and make it more difficult to optimise the best use of transport as well if those are coming through late. We do ask people have to, every year have to apply for home to school transport, and that needs to be in around July time as well. But due to the delays in the front-end processing, that has definitely caused us some delays this year and put some cost into the system. So we have put, like I said, that is why there's often a movement between Q1 and Q2 of the arrangements. So those are some of the things we are doing. From a point of view of benchmarking, as part of senior officers and cabinet member visits actually to the LGA conference that was referenced earlier, we have got a company in at the moment called People2, who we are getting to review all our arrangements and look at 3 data sets. So they are looking at nationally published data, they are looking at data of work that they have done with a cohort of 40 local authorities, so they will do some internal benchmarking with our nearest neighbours, which is common practice, and they are looking at our own data as well. So we do expect within the next 3 to 4 weeks to have had that independent assessment, which will very much give a robust benchmarking across those 3 data sets. That's not to say we don't do that already, but we've actually gotten somebody else to do that, and I'm pleased to say that at the moment that is at no cost to the authority. It's through some of those connections that have been made as part of that work. So I know it's an area certainly informal cabinet are interested in, and you're interested in, and perhaps when we've undertaken that exercise, they will produce a product at the end that will give us key lines of inquiry where they think we are an outlier, where we think we should be focusing our activity as well. In addition to that, our Director of Place Management did actually sit on a national working group of the Association of Directors of Environment Planning and Transport, where they've put together a good practice guide. So he has also taken some of that work and embedded it as well. So he has done that within the last year as well. And we do anecdotally and informally also work with other local authorities in the vicinity to look at what's going on a more informal basis.
Thank you. I mean, that sounds like a lot is going on, and we're waiting, really good comprehensive feedback. Thank you. And it's obviously got to wait and see it coming to fruition, haven't we? Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Toby?
Can I just ask Mandy what she meant by taking single car journeys in-house?
It is actually having a fleet of vehicles with our own drivers. As simple as that, yeah. So we've started small, and we do have to look. I mean, Cherry mentioned some of our processes and procedures. One of the areas we do have to get more slick in is our onboarding, when we are actually getting people on board, because we are losing people at the moment. So that's the other area that I've been working very closely with HR colleagues to try and get the process sleeker. But effectively, it is about delivering it yourself rather than actually going out to the market.
Thank you. I get the budget's hugely difficult things to go and get right, and we get some challenges and things which are difficult to predict. We've got budgeting coming around in January. Can I ask when that does come? When, if the areas which it comes for come with the amber and red financial risks for those areas and capital programmes and things as well, so we can understand what sort of confidence we can have in those budget lines. And it would also be really good if we could see the predicted finished quarters for capital programmes and things there as well, and see if everything's all butted up against the end of a financial year, or if we can be confident it's going to finish or not.
Sure. You'll just let me make sure I'm understanding what you're asking for, which is basically just a clear articulation of where we are on the capital programme, essentially.
Capital and revenue, I think it is. And capital-wise, yeah, the risks and things we've got against them, and when we're expecting those capital programmes to finish. For the revenue side of things, where we see our main risks against each of those items and things there. Positive or negative, so.
Okay.
Thanks.
Colin?
Just a couple of things for me. Mandy, in terms of just those sort of single pupil daily journey numbers, just to give us some perspective, bringing it in-house, does that mean we've got 50 plus a day we've got to cover? Is it 80 plus? I mean, I just wonder if you can give us a context.
I haven't got those figures to hand, but I can certainly get them for you. That's not a problem.
Thank you. The other one I just want to pass comment on is the old chestnut of our property. We've gone through all sorts of iterations about splitting it and doing this with it and doing that with it, but we can't seem to hit any target with it. It's just disappointing to see that we are continuing to not let buildings because we're not maintaining things properly. You know, I'm very aware of a potential tenant we've lost in the last few months because of the lack of maintenance on the building, that is still empty, and they've gone and signed a commercial lease somewhere else. Now, I'm just keen to see, as a scrutiny panel, when are we going to get an update on the operating work of corporate and commercial estate, because I still think it's bringing budgetary pressures to us that we shouldn't be getting at this stage.
Yeah, Councillor Blackburn, you're right to focus in terms of the monitoring. Whilst the budget was reset for commercial income because of passing rents a lot lower than it was 4 years ago, there is still income generating properties that need maintenance, so whilst they are being minimised, so void levels are a lot lower now than they were, say, 2 years ago, that it's still a priority to have properties that are there and available for tenants that can be occupied as soon as possible. So I think that's probably maybe an action and a commitment for the forward plan conversation, because I think there's two parts. There's discussing with this panel the split of the estate and the corporate landlord model, but then also assurance on performance within the commercial estate also.
I've got the answer to your question, if that helps. I've just quickly looked at the Home to School Intelligence Dashboard. So just to give you an idea, the number of car journeys, like from 2020 to 2021 has gone up from 154 to 24-25 to 330. And I'm assuming that's on, as we've set up for the year. Our number of minibuses has stayed consistent. Our number of coaches has stayed consistent, and the young people as well. So you can see that's the big area of growth. It's more than doubled. And like I said, what will also help, of course, is the plans we've got for capital around Charlton House, Culverhay, and we're in a sort of position, if we get local provision, it will certainly help with our home to school transport as well in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can just comment more widely on the, I think all of these problems are essentially stemming from a culture of outsourcing to private provision that has been happening over the last 20 years, 30 years, and that applies with the children's services more widely. It's not just home to school transport, but councils have been encouraged not to do things themselves, and the problem is that that's left us open to market failures, and that's what we're seeing now, is that the market's failing and we just don't have the capacity in-house. We've got to rebuild it, and that's very difficult and time-consuming. I think the government gets that, so I'm hoping that they will provide helping us in helping councils rebuild that internal service that allows us then to have some control over it, and we won't then be subject to the vagaries of the market. That those single car journeys that Mandy's talking about are essentially taxis. That's because we just don't have the in-house capability of doing that job, whereas, in the past, that would have been the kind of thing that people would have expected councils to do themselves. And so I think, rebuilding that capacity is going to be hugely important to getting this stuff back under control.
Thank you. Sorry, do you? I was going to ask some questions myself, but did you have a question before?
I've got some minor ones which first, it was small things that I just didn't quite understand, so I wouldn't mind understanding them. But in the mitigations, the action plan, with commercial estate, in economic development, so there's some an action plan for economic development. I just didn't quite understand it. One-off release of repairs provision, and then reduction in repairs and maintenance spend. I thought it was the maintenance spend and accelerating that brought in the income. So I don't quite understand what that means. So it's like a reduction in repairs is one statement, and then a release of repairs provision. So that was one question. And also, what's the neighbourhood services discretionary activity that is might be temporarily stopped? Is another action. And then another thing I don't actually understand, I'm sure there's a very obvious answer, with the capital budget. Quarter one, the capital budget was 17 million, and then quarter two, it's about 100 million. Is that, why is that different? Is it because it's reassessed, or more things come forward to be done? I'm not sure. Those are...
You want to take the second one first, yeah. So the main difference on the capital programme between the quarters is we reflect the rephasing from the outturn report. So quarter one is too early to reflect slippage and rephasing from the prior year, whereas quarter two picks up on that rephasing. So that's the most significant. There will be an element of projects that have come for approval, new projects, but the bulk of it is the rephasing from the previous year, from outturn.
Can I just check the other point you mentioned is in paragraph 3.6? Is that the right?
3.6, so under economic development, so...
Yeah, the one-off release of repairs provision.
And then reduction in repairs and maintenance. My simple understanding is that repairs and maintenance is what makes the property.
Yeah. So the provision is we were in negotiations with a property about liability for under a lease arrangement. So last year we made a provision on the balance sheet for those costs. Those costs are still in negotiation. So, but current stage of negotiations is we can release some of that provision on a one-off basis. The repairs and maintenance is the ongoing revenue repairs and maintenance. I think there's been a priority-based review on that, so there are some elements that can be delayed till next year to mitigate some of the pressures in the service. So that's those two.
Is discretionary activity in neighbourhood services might be stopped. I just was interested what that might be, but you could perhaps write to me afterwards if you want to.
That's where we've been able to not fill some posts, and again, very similar to the property maintenance side, is those activities that we can slow down or defer to the following years, and I know a couple relate to vacant posts that it's been hard to fill as well.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I think the point has been made by Colin and by Lucy about the corporate estate. I think the headline is clearly children's services, and there's a danger because of the amount of money with children's services that actually the 1.5 million shortfall on corporate estate passes slightly under the radar. I think it would be useful to have some more understanding about an element of the budget. There's a degree more under our control. We can do something about in a way that children's services can't. So let's flag up about that. It would also be useful as well to have another line after the neighbourhood services lower than budgeted income on licensing pest control improvement service, just a line trying to explain why that is, or why the predictive model hasn't worked on that. but will return just to children's services, 5.5 million, eye-watering amount. First of all, it is a national problem. It's been flagged up in Parliament. Probably worth mentioning as well, from the Labour Party's point of view, with the increased number of MPs, there are a considerable number of those new Labour MPs who were councillors and have come from senior levels in councils as well. I think that's been reflected in that understanding at a parliamentary level about what happens in local government. There's been some interesting work done and reports from the LGA about pressures on SEND and the EHCPs. And I think one point's been made and one question's been asked is why are the number of SEND assessments and EHCPs proportionally higher in the UK than in comparative other European countries? Well, what is the driver about that? Why is that happening? And clearly it's a broken system, and that's where we are. But just a couple of observations, I suppose. We know there are pressures on the children's services budget. They were rebased last year with a considerable uplift, but clearly, I'm trying to be careful with criticism. How come the rebase and the prediction is so far out? Because clearly, and what confidence do we have if we're rebasing again, presumably in next February? What confidence can we have that those predictions are trustworthy? To be cruel on that. I think that because that has an impact on other areas of council spend where clearly departments have taken on those financial pressures, have met their targets, but are now going to be expected, presumably, to increase the difficult decisions financial decisions they were given, financial targets, and I have to double down on that. So, what confidence do we have? Because it will be a question I'll be asking, and I'm sure other members of Scrutiny will be asking when it comes to budget scrutiny in January. How meaningful is this if, once again, the one thing we can predict is that children's services will be overspending?
Thank you, Chair. Just to respond to that, I mean, you're articulating exactly the concerns I'm articulating back to officers, and I think that I can assure you that I am being pretty clear, and I'm sure that Mandy will acknowledge this, being pretty clear and robust about the fact that we cannot continue like this. I mean, it's because, as you say, whilst we are managing and we are in a very much better position than most councils, and that we are coping with this, it is taking money away from other things we could be doing, and that's not a position we can. It's not a sustainable position. We cannot be every year underestimating the children's services budget and then having to take emergency action halfway through the year. That is not a position that is reasonable or sustainable. So, I say, please be assured that the Cabinet member and Cabinet are extremely keen to see that position resolved. As I say, I don't want to be critical of officers because there are very, very difficult systemic circumstances, but we have to get this right now.
Thank you. Malcolm?
Yeah, for me, that's really just why I think we need to see those lists and issues when we come into that budget setting side of things, because it is so difficult. But if we're to be anything, if we're to approve something with anything like surety on it, we need to be able to see those and make those have that context in our approval. Otherwise, we haven't got a chance.
Okay, if I can just comment on the EHCP point as well. I mean, which you made, you're right, there were some very useful sessions at the LGA conference around EHCPs. Obviously, the system was changed, which meant that it was parents didn't need a school's backing in order to apply for an EHCP, which meant that the number of EHCPs went up quite dramatically. But there was a very, very good, useful session which pointed out that despite the massive increase in EHCPs, we're not actually seeing better outcomes for children, which is absolutely an indication of a broken system. It is systemically bad that we are spending a lot more money, we have a lot more EHCPs being applied, and yet the outcomes are not improving. In the view of most people who are looking at this, early intervention is the only serious way of dealing with this, and at the moment we are pushing parents into seeing the HCP as being the only way of getting help, and actually what we need is much earlier intervention and help for children to stay in school, in the classroom, without an EHCP.
Thank you. Just to build on what Mark has said, one of the things we have done recently is we've got a special educational needs early help team that have just been established as part of the dedicated schools arrangements as well, to try and talk to parents early, because also it's about parents having confidence that their child doesn't have to have an EHCP to have the outcomes that they need, as Mark said. And, you know, we're working very closely with schools as well to increase our local provision and have increased placement provision locally. So there is an early help service that was introduced in September, and we obviously haven't seen the fruition of that yet because it's new, but that is dedicated to that early help and prevention for families to support them and take them through those needs as well. So we are trying to change that to the front end to try and help families as early as possible.
Thank you for that, briefing and that report. Moving on to the panel work plan. I know that, I think, Toby, you had a point to make on this?
Yes. I brought up in July that I thought we should scrutinise the contract for the library IT provision, because although it was procured by Somerset, it's not, to my mind, delivering a satisfactory service. It feels like you're using a dial-up computer when you log in. I've had some discussions with the head of IT, customer services, but I think we really do need to understand how a modern IT procurement led to an unsatisfactory product, and see whether there are lessons that can be learned for other IT procurements we've got to do, like, for instance, the pension funds administration system. So I hope we can have a paper or set up a specific meeting, possibly with Somerset, to have a look at that contract and learn some lessons.
Thank you. I think, Lucy, did you want to talk KPIs?
Yes, sorry, I had just a couple of things. Again, in the July meeting, there were some resolutions agreed, and they're in the minutes, but that we'd like to receive updates on the measures to address the costs associated with agency staff within waste services, and also the plans to address the maintenance refurbishment of the commercial estate, so that more income can be realised. So those were resolutions, and it would be good to have that in a future meeting. And I was also wanted to propose something before I step down, that strategic performance indicators may have an update on those, has a regular place in the same way as financial reports do, because I think one doesn't go with, you know, we're getting one side of the story and not the other. We get the finances, and then it's a kind of ad hoc coming before us with this performance indicators, but I think that should be something that comes up every year, and we see how they develop. And I think it touched a little bit on in the value for money report to corporate audit, about how the data collection for those indicators could be more timely and accurate. And whilst audit will look at the overview of the process, I think it's our role to kind of take a bit more of an interest in those performance indicators. So I'd quite like to see that coming up annually. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it'd be useful to have that scheduled in on an annual basis rather than whatever. I'd also suggest as well on the work plan. I mean, we had the update on the operating model on Bob. I think it'd be useful to have another update, you know, the July, September after the consultation period to see where we are with that. Looking around, if there's, yep, property services.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it today, so if we can make sure that that is actually marked on the plan, that'd be great. Thank you.
Can we see that in either May or July? Probably May, I'd have thought. Okay. Looking at the clock, it is 10 to 6, so we've been going for just under 2 hours. Thank you all for attending, and look forward to seeing all of you, well, some of you, apart from those who are avoiding it, Council on Thursday. Oh, sorry, giving apologies, avoiding is the wrong word, or, well, maybe. Thank you, and good night.